Jai Hind, everybody. We are really fortunate today to discuss a subject which is, very, very important for India, especially at this juncture. Those of you who have a little interest in history, so you take back your mind when we became independent on 15th August 1947. And the current regime of China, the PRC, came into being on 1st October 1949. So during 15th August 47 and 1st October 1949, Tibet was a nation having its own flag, its own ambassadors in certain number of countries, not only during that duration, prior to that also. Somehow India also had its own challenges of integrating large number of states. Then the JNK War of 47 started and number of other things. We could not look at our boundary issues at that time. Bordering Tibet, which is now bordering China because of Tibet has been eaten up by China. I think there is a serious need for all of us to look at this issue. At least in our awareness domain, it must increase. Though there have been some effort on part of United States of America as well as some of the Western countries to look at that issues, and United States of America has passed certain bills and tabled some of them, which actually present India another opportunity to look at this oversight more seriously. Of course, whenever you become proactive on a particular issue having serious geopolitical significance, there are associated challenges as well. It's not that simple that you decide and act and there will be no response. And Newton's third law of motion gets modified, where it is not only the action invites the equal amount of reaction, the reaction may be far more severe in majority of the cases, especially when we are bordering a country like China. We have eminent speaker, Mr. Vijay Kranti, who specializes on Tibet for more than 50 years. He has been speaking on this issue since long, and I am grateful to Anamitra for having him connected to us. I'm sure our time which we will be spending in hearing him for about 45 minutes or so will be very, very interesting. So before I invite Mr. Vijay Kranti, I will request Anamitra to speak about the speaker so that we can thereafter move ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Mr. Vijay Kranti is a senior media professional of Kashmir origin. He has over 50 years of experience in print media, TV, radio, photography, media, education, corporate communication, and corporate social responsibility. He has been on the staff of some of the leading media groups, including India Today, Radio Voice of America, Aaj Tak TV, Z News, and DD News. As a journalist, his main subjects of specialization are Tibet, China, and Jammu and Kashmir. As a photographer, his special area of focus are Tibet, Ladakh, and Himalayan Buddhism. He has won international acclaim for his unique and aesthetic documentation of Tibetan life and culture. Mr. Vijay Kranti has also authored a dozen of books to his credit in English, Hindi, Tibetan, and Spanish, including Dalai Lama Speaks, his famous coffee table book on Dalai Lama. Currently, he is the chairman, Center for Himalayan Asia Studies and Engagement, CHASE, a think tank and an active meeting point for Indian and international experts, researchers, writers, and advocacy groups who take keen interest on various aspects of political, social, economic, and strategic developments in China, Tibet, and other parts of this region. Over to you.
So, Jai Hind and Namaskar to everybody. I'm Vijay Kranti. Okay. It's a privilege for me to be at the Center for Joint Warfare Studies as a guest speaker. My subject today is going to be the recent bills which have been passed by the United States of America Congress, and then another bill which is waiting just to be signed by the President of America to become a law. And then also going into the previous similar bills and laws or rules which America has had about Tibet, which define its policy on Tibet and approach towards China on this issue. And the main focus, finally, of my discussion would be how all this matters to India and what are new openings or opportunities for India on this subject, the opportunities which we have already missed and opportunities which are waiting for us. So I'll discuss these issues, but the first focus will be on explaining how American government, American Congress has been looking at Tibet and how it has been making policies and its approach in especially in foreign matters on various aspects of the Tibetan issue. Today, the main focus will be on two bills. The one is popularly known as HR 4331, which means House of Representatives Bill 4331. The title of this bill, which became an act finally, is Tibetan Policy and Support Act of 2019, which was practically a consolidation of all previous bills, laws, rules, and decisions of the government of USA in past many decades. Because there has been, we'll come to that, there have been a lot of so many rules, so many bills already passed, but this time they consolidated. And the reason, I'm sure you understand better than me, is the changing attitude of PRC. It's the way now it has become a very serious threat to the supremacy of America itself, which is now compelling the American government to reorganize, rethink its own approach towards all those issues which matter for, or which make China vulnerable. This is one of them. And of course, now America is finding that Tibet is a very, very important card if it has to deal with China. And it's not only Tibet on which America has come out with new bills or new laws. It is focusing equally, if not more aggressively, on Eastern Turkestan, which China named as Xinjiang. So America has come out on a few more bills on Xinjiang, but today we are not going to discuss that. We'll focus on Tibet. The second bill which I'm going to discuss with you is HR 533, which is again the House of, initially it was passed by House of Representatives as bill number 533. And the title was Promoting a Resolution to the Tibet-China Dispute Act of 2024. So this second one, I would say, was a kind of re-oiling of the machinery which America has developed over the years on issue of Tibet. And all these bills, they show the renewed interest of America in Tibet. We'll go to these two bills. The HR 433, the title, as I said, is Tibetan Policy and Support Act of 2019. It's to define its status. The purpose as defined by the US Congress is modification and reauthorization of Tibet Policy Act of 2002 to reorganize and consolidate all various acts, rules, etc., the decisions taken by the American government in the past on Tibet. The status, it was passed by almost unanimously by the House of Representatives and then by the Senate. And finally, President Donald Trump, he signed this bill to make it a law, which is now binding on both the present US president and all future US presidents, the future parliaments, means Congress of USA, and all the secretaries of state of future, which makes them obliged to follow these laws So these are not ordinary political statements. These are laws. We should understand. And it came into power on 27th December. Very interesting. The date is very interesting. Only a day and a half after Donald Trump and his government and his country came out of their celebrations of Christmas, the very first thing he did was sign this bill. And these were the days when the American Congress, you would see the worst of fights between the two sides, the Republicans and the Democrats. They won't agree on anything. But it's very interesting, on laws on Tibet, they were unanimous. And this is very interesting. In the morning, they are fighting. And an hour later, when they are voting on Tibet, they have a common approach. They sign it, they vote for it. So that shows the focus of American government and the American democracy, their system. The second bill, as I said, we are going to talk about is HR 533. The title is Promoting a Resolution to the Tibet-China Dispute Act. And the purpose of this bill, as defined in the documents of the US Congress, is to further amend the Tibet Policy Act of 2002 and add to the Tibet Policy and Support Act of 2019. So here we see that even after coming out with a consolidated bill of 4331 in 2019, they are still sharpening the weapon against China on Tibet. And they are coming out with new additions to that law. And it was unanimously passed by House of Representatives, and only on 23rd of this month, the Senate also passed it unanimously. And now we are waiting any day. President Biden will sign it, and it will become a new law on Tibet. Now I will discuss these bills in detail. What is the real functioning points? What do they mean exactly in real terms on the ground? The purpose of the bill, as I said, is to support and protect distinct Tibetan identity. There are 14, it's very interesting. There are 14 targets which the US Congress defined for itself in writing what they want to achieve or what do they want to do on this issue. So I'll very quickly mention those 14 points. The very first is to support and protect the distinct Tibetan identity. And the second is to reaffirm that Tibet is an occupied country. This is very interesting. I'll come to this point later also. That the American government is now deciding through a bill which becomes a law, which announces that Tibet is an occupied country. If you see, originally it was somewhere in 1996, I think. Yeah, it was already announced that Tibet is an occupied country, but now they are asserting it. This is very interesting because in between all these years, when China has been hoping that Tibet will behave, that China will behave, American government was hoping that China will start behaving on Tibet and it will look after its own America's interest also in the whole game. When they realize that China is nowhere moving on the path as they expected, they had announced it in 1993 that Tibet is an occupied country. But during these years, the Americans, whenever the Chinese president, a visiting president, or when American president goes to China, they were always challenging, what is your policy on Tibet? And they would say, and I quote them, very interesting. No policy of the United States government is based on the assumption that Tibet is not a part of China. Just see, double negative, trying to keep little path or changing their opinion or policy. So they have been throughout saying it. But on their papers, they have announced it already that Tibet is an occupied. You can say, how can they be contradictory? Actually, if you look at it, it's not contradictory. They say Tibet is an occupied country. Okay, that's our policy. No policy of United States government is based on the assumption that Tibet is not a part of China. So they say, yes, they are part of China, occupied. They won't use the word occupied, but they say this is our policy. So there is a continuity about it. The third point, you will see that the US government gave a new dimension to Tibet by appointing a special coordinator on Tibetan issues in the US government. This is very interesting. Earlier you heard of Condoleezza Rice. She was she was the earlier coordinator. Then we had Urza Zia. Currently is Urza Zia. And before her was Robert Dest. So Americans have been showing their seriousness by keeping a special coordinator for Tibetan issues. And there were 6 priorities they defined for the special coordinator for Tibetan issues. And they were, one is on Tibetan religion. The second was about Tibet's culture. Third was on political contact with the political leaders of Tibet. Fourth was keeping Tibet alive and hot within the US Congress as an issue. And then organizing relations, promoting relations among the international community and to develop allies of the US on Tibetan issue. And the sixth was keeping the civic society across the world active on the issue of Tibet. Well, these 6 points make it very clear that show the seriousness of Tibet, of the American government they have had on Tibet. The fourth point is that US president has been this bill demands the US president to encourage Dharamsala Beijing dialogue, to encourage Dharamsala, Dalai Lama, and the Chinese government to have a dialogue to settle the issue through dialogue. Fifth is to monitor, because there are so many projects America is financing inside occupied Tibet in the name of the development of or support of the Tibetan people. So they say that all this money should be monitored. The project should be monitored so that China does not misuse this money and opportunity to consolidate their control on Tibet. Then they demand the US Congress and the government to have a kind of continuous contact with the European Union on the Tibetan issue, because European Union is their biggest and most reliable ally. So keeping European Union also active on the Tibetan issue is one major part. And then the sixth point is coordination between US Congress. The seventh point is pressurize the PRC, the government of Beijing, the government of China, for release of those Tibetan prisoners who are languishing in Chinese jails for political reasons, for so many reasons. And another very interesting point is now this bill 4331, the act, makes it obligatory for American government to press upon and to push the PRC government to establish a consulate office of America in Lhasa, in Tibet, which China has not allowed any country. India had it. We had a consulate. We had 3 trade missions, trade offices in Tibet before China occupied Tibet. And unfortunately, our leadership at that time, they thought that this was legacy of imperialism. You know, having consulate office in Tibet, Nehruji announced it's a legacy of imperialism. India had freedom to appoint some companies of Indian armed forces in whatever shape inside Tibet. Nehruji gave it up. You know, when he signed this so-called 1954 Panchashil agreement, he gave away all this right to maintain your armed forces inside Tibet. They gave up. Another thing Nehruji gave up was to maintain the telegraph and the phone system inside Tibet. So they handed it over to China. Sorry. So you can see that America has now announced that it will, TRC must give it right to have a consulate office in Lhasa, and it makes it obligatory for all coming governments of America to not permit China open any new consulate inside America unless they first allow America to have a consulate in Lhasa. India tried, but China simply said, just don't talk about it. And we said, okay, sir, we will not. This is the difference. The ninth point, which 4331 makes emphatically underlines, is to encourage discussion on Tibet in the United Nations and all other international forums. And then welfare and release of 11th Panchen Lama. Panchen Lama, who was identified, it's a very different issue for him. It's a subject of full talk, how China dealt with Panchen Lama and what are the theory behind, what they want to achieve. It's a full 40 minutes, I would say, a subject of talk, which is very relevant to India. So they emphasize that the issue of Panchen Lama should remain alive. And a very related issue is on the reincarnation of next Dalai Lama or future Dalai Lamas or other future Tulkus, means the reincarnate Lamas of Tibet. So this law announces that China should stop interfering in these processes. And there were two very interesting points in this law, which on one, they admire India and Nepal for caring for the Tibetan refugees. They put it on record that we admire India for taking care of Tibetan refugees, and also to Nepal. But in the second point, they asked Nepal to start behaving properly towards the Tibetan refugees who escaped from Tibet to Nepal. And then there was an understanding between the UNHCR, between Indian government and Nepal government, that whosoever Tibetan escapes from Tibet, so they should be treated nicely, and after proper briefing by Indian authorities, they should be allowed to enter India so that they can feel secure. Nepal has stopped it completely, 100%. Rather, whenever there was an issue when some Tibetan escaped, the Nepalese army, Nepalese police, Nepalese bureaucrats, they work together and catch hold of them and push them back, hand them over to the Chinese authorities. And I have some pictures of quite a few years old, when after handing over those escaping Tibetans back to the Chinese hands across that friendship bridge, they are coming back with gifts of beer crates. There are pictures, and on their hands there are many handcuffs hanging, which shows that they have come back with gifts. So America is pressurizing Nepal to stop behaving like that and support. And then the last point, which is very important, is to provide sufficient financial assistance to the Tibetan refugees and the Dalai Lama's establishment. There were, as I was saying, that we should understand that there were a few other bills. Of course, I must admit, this is not a consolidated list of those bills because there are too many. I don't think an American official can make one full list, because many of those decisions were as financial decisions, taken for some immediate contingency. And many times they used certain resolutions of the Congress, which were not related to Tibet, but indirectly they would put a point which will ensure some kind of help to the Tibetan people, some contingencies. So there are innumerable, not laws, but many orders in the US government about Tibet. I have only picked up a few, the 1992-93 which was public law. That was the first time when American Congress announced that Tibet is an occupied country. In 2002, as we mentioned just now, the Tibetan Policy Act of 2002, which is one of the biggest milestones of recent history of American policy on Tibet. So that was in 2002. And then in 2011, they came out with the Tibetan Refugee Assistance Act to provide immigration to about 3,000 Tibetans living in India, Nepal, Bhutan, and so on. In 2015, it was HR 337, which was passed on June 8. And in 2018, they came out with S429, which was a Senate resolution. In 2018, again, it was a Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act of 2018, where America demanded from China that you should provide reciprocal access in so many ways, the diplomatic also, and also because China does not allow the journalists of any country to, those who are stationed in Beijing are not allowed to go to Tibet. They will go to Tibet only when the Communist Party organizes a conducted tour. Otherwise, they are not allowed. And even during the conducted tour, they are expected to be here. So that was one. And in 2018, again, US has a very important instrument in its government system, which is called the US Report on International Religious Freedoms. This time they used it to assert Dalai Lama's right about reincarnation. This is the same law which America has been using against India to announce that Indian government is unfair to its minorities. Whatever this entire Western lobby is building up narrative against India. This US, I would say, underline that US Report on International Religious Freedoms is one of those very potential instruments, legal instruments which American government is using as a tool to advance its interests even in democracies like India and many other countries. In 2019, the Tibet Policy and Support Act, which we just now discussed, was one of the biggest bills which came out. And this year, it is HR 553, which was passed in February this year in the House of Representatives, and in May, passed by the Senate, and it will become a law anyway. Next. So when 4331 was introduced, America announced the main purpose was to modify and reauthorization of Tibet Policy Act of 2002, and which had three purposes, three goals to achieve. Number one was its open assertion and support to Tibet as an occupied country. Second was to express its open support to Gaden Phodrang. Gaden Phodrang is Dalai Lama's private office, the establishment or trust which handles the affairs of Dalai Lama as institution, as individual. So the US Congress expressed direct full support to the Gaden Phodrang and the Central Tibetan administration in the selection of next Dalai Lama. So this was one of those most emphatic announcements from the American side to express its opinion on the reincarnation of Dalai Lama. And the third was, we can say, quite aggressive changes of the US government and the state agencies when this law makes it obligatory for all agencies of American government, including its foreign office, including the presidential office, to deal seriously with China, and wherever China is acting against interest of Tibet in any way, all those agencies are obliged to be proactive to handle such issues. Yeah, next. I will discuss some significant actions of this new US Act. I'll discuss it in my next 3 slides, these issues. The very first is the dialogue. America's assertive or assertion on the conduct of dialogue between Dalai Lama and Beijing. This is very interesting that American government has announced, the Congress has announced that Tibet is an unsettled issue. This is very interesting. You know, it's a direct confrontation to China's assertion that Tibet is an integral part of of China. Tibet is an internal matter of China. Tibet is a core issue which nobody should dare to touch. These are assertions of Chinese government. Xi Jinping especially is very aggressive. And here the bill says that Tibet is an unsettled issue, which makes it open for the whole world to redefine or reorganize its policy on Tibet. And one very important issue about dialogue is that American Congress has now made it clear that PRC should not have any precondition for conducting a dialogue with Dalai Lama. And this is very significant because China has been making demands that we will discuss with you on certain preconditions. Number one, it will be a discussion only about Dalai Lama's return to China. Not, no question of issuing giving autonomy or freedom to China, to Tibet. But it's return of Dalai Lama. And they say that Dalai Lama must and say publicly admit that Tibet was always a part of China since ancient days. This is another condition. And the third condition is that definition of Tibet is not Tibet autonomous region. The definition of Tibet is, this is America is asserting what Dalai Lama has been asserting and China has been rejecting throughout. That Tibet is not only Thar, it is also those parts of Tibet, Kham and Amdo and Uchan. All three. Out of this, as you know better than me, that Tibet autonomous region was carved out of the occupied Tibet, and about 2/3 of Tibet of Kham and Amdo, they were broken into small pieces, geographic pieces, and they were assimilated in the adjoining Chinese provinces of Yunnan, Sichuan, Qinghai, and Gansu. So this is how Tibet autonomous region came up. And China says that if we want to discuss with Dalai Lama Tibet, Tibet is this, Thar. And American Congress says no. We'll come to that point where it has specifically mentioned that Tibet is the original Tibet. Yeah, in the next slide, I'm discussing this HR 433, those points, and about reincarnation of Dalai Lama. So here it says that the exclusive right of Dalai Lama, the right of Dalai Lama's finding reincarnation, it rests with exclusively on Dalai Lama himself, because there is a tradition that all those reincarnate lamas, they leave behind signs and instructions about where he will be reborn in next life. So that is, and China doesn't want to follow that. So it says that it is the prerogative of Dalai Lama himself to decide about his reincarnation. And China must follow the Tibetan traditional system for the selection, education, veneration of 15th Dalai Lama and other reincarnates. We'll come to that point what China wants when we come to that. So, yeah, there was Order 5 in 2007. The Chinese government in 2007, the Chinese government announced a new law which they call Order 5, and it's very interesting. The Order 5 says, if you speak in a very ordinary person's language, it says no incarnate Lama has right to be reborn without written and approved stamp of Communist Party of China. Unless the Communist Party of China certifies on a paper with its stamp, no incarnate Lama is allowed to be reborn. In practical, it means if the Tibetans want to install any new reincarnation of a monk, then they must go to the Communist Party of China, seek permission that we want to find out the reincarnation. Then Chinese Communist Party will establish a committee headed by a Communist Party official and other senior monks of that institution to find out the next reincarnation. And after finding it, the Communist Party will certify that he is the right incarnation and is allowed to be. And then Communist Party will take charge of educating that reincarnate Lama. This is order 5 about reincarnation. And one very interesting point which India has also to note down very seriously is, I'll come to the other points where India should do, but here it is, the American Congress resolution very clearly mentions in writing that Tibetan Buddhism also belongs, besides Tibet, it also belongs to Bhutan, India, Mongolia, Nepal, Russia, and other countries like America where Tibetans are living. So therefore, there is no special role for People's Republic of China or the Communist Party of China in selection of any reincarnation. Now, this is very specific they have mentioned. And then another point is that the US president and the US government, its offices and machineries, agencies are obliged to ensure that all these points are applied. And if China tries to interfere in it anyway, then all officials of Chinese Communist Party or Chinese government should be handled by the US government in the form of sanctions against them, against their children, etc. So that makes it very clear on what is the American policy. And then some more points. As I said, America should have its consulate in Lhasa. We have discussed it already. And development of the US Congress, by passing this law, instructs the President of America to work in the direction of developing an international diplomatic coalition on the issue of Tibet. This is very interesting. This again refers to India also. Because if India joins this effort, then India will not be alone, as our governments have been always afraid of China. So can we talk about Tibet? China will be very angry. We should not touch any point. It is very unfortunate. I hope I'm not touching anybody's sensitive nerves of past governments or their followers. If I mention that India's foreign policy has been unfortunately suffering from a disease. I call it a disease, which doesn't have a proper name as it happens in the medical terminology, and they don't find the real cause and other things, but they know there is a disease. Then it is defined as a syndrome. So the disease which has afflicted previous Indian governments and especially our some officials of Ministry of External Affairs, I call it Meera Sinha Bhattacharjee syndrome. We know, with all due respect, that Meera Sinha Bhattacharjee used to be one of the biggest, I'm not saying greatest, biggest China experts who unfortunately died a few years ago. But she was a Marxist who was in India's Foreign Affairs Service, who chose to leave that service and chose to become an academician, joined JNU, and since then, the way she inflicted the Indian policy on China in such a huge manner, no individual single has ever done in India's history of more than 70 years. This Meera Singh Bhattacharya syndrome had a basic, what you call rule. We should not do anything which makes China unhappy or annoys China, which means all decision about India's security, India's interests should be taken only after taking care that it does not affect China. And unfortunately, this disease has inflicted the Ministry of External Affairs in a very big way for more than 60 years. And that's why you see, so many issues, even including, making roads, constructing roads up to the last point of our borders for our army. We didn't do it because it will annoy China. Or if we construct the road, the Chinese army will walk in, use those roads to walk into our country. This was our approach. It's only when the current government of, headed by Mr. Modi, that they overturned this policy, they changed the approach, and today, if I'm not wrong, more than 70 roads, all-time roads, all-weather roads, have been almost already or almost constructed to connect our last Jawan on our last post. So this is a change. Anyhow, that was another. So I think this policy of America of an international diplomatic coalition makes an opening for Indian government to rethink its approach on the issue of Tibet. Then this law makes it again very clear that the Chinese government the US government should not support directly or indirectly any action or project inside Tibet which improves China's control and influence over Tibetan people and Tibetan land, which means no settlement and no land transfers of Tibet or Tibetans to non-Tibetans inside Tibet, and no relocation of Tibetan nomads, which China is doing in a very, very, very big way. And then another point is the promotion of human rights and distinct cultural identity of Tibet. And to support Tibetan, to promote news coming from Tibet and about Tibet through the Radio Voice of America and Radio Free Asia. We should understand, I'm a journalist, I know it. Many of us think that BBC is a very free, very professional organization. In reality, it is a special propaganda purpose vehicle of the British government, which is functioning with wonderful finesse. And we start believing it as the word of God. In America also, we have two agencies called Voice of America and Radio Free Asia. But Americans don't hide it like the British or like BBC. They say it is our policy. We promote it, we finance it. And these two radio stations help us in promoting our interests abroad. So here, this law makes enough scope to keep funding Voice of America and Free Asia's Tibet services, China services. Next. So now we come to the second law, which is now the bill, which is going to become law any day. It may become tomorrow or day after, maybe in a couple of weeks or so, when President Biden signs it. So that is HR 533, which was passed originally as House of Representatives Bill 533. And we discussed that. I will discuss. So what it means right now. The first is this, as the bill announces, the sense of Congress behind presenting and passing this bill is to correct Tibet's history, to make it clear that Tibet was not part of China since ancient times, as China claims. It, as I earlier said, it gives a very clear definition of Tibet, no ambiguity. It says that Tibet Autonomous Region is not the real Tibet. because Tibet Autonomous Region was created by China, by first occupying Tibet, then manipulating with its geography, reorganizing it, cutting out many parts of Tibet and throwing them in the adjoining Chinese provinces, and leaving behind Tibet Autonomous Region, TAR. So it says TAR is not only Tibet. The real Tibet is, the definition of Tibet is TAR plus all other Tibetan autonomous prefectures and counties in Gansu, Qinghai, Sichuan, and Yunnan provinces of China. So then it says that all the acts which are being committed to suppress the Tibetan identity and damage the environment of Tibet should be taken note of and proper action should be taken. And then it says that America has been advising Chinese government since long to settle and find a solution with Dalai Lama on the issue of Tibet. So it has failed. It says that PRC has failed to meet US expectations on this dialogue. And now it wants that the American government should take initiative to support such kind of dialogue. Then it obliges the American government and its agencies to counter the Chinese propaganda on Tibet and to promote the real issues and information on Tibet. So now we are coming to the concluding side of this today's discussion. All said and done, it remains America's view on Tibet, America's view on China, America's policy on how to define Tibetan problem, America's policy on how to handle China. Where is India? India is, I would say, more important than America as far as Tibet issue is concerned. America has no border with China. And Tibet is many thousands kilometers away from America. But if they decide to be concerned about Tibet, welcome. The issue is, India is very much on the borders of Tibet. When China occupied Tibet, it crossed over to India's borders overnight. Because if you see the history of last 100, 200, 300, 500, 4,000 years, not along these 4,000 kilometers of border, Himalayan borders, between India and Tibet, not at one point for one day, on 1 inch of the land, there was India on this side or China on that side. Indian security agencies on this side or Chinese security agencies on this side. India's trade representatives on this side or China's representative on this side. India's postal system on this side or Chinese postal system on that side. India's currency on this side and Chinese currency on that side. Never, not for one day. It was never. It was always India and Tibet. It was only when China occupied Tibet in 1951 that PLA marched over Tibet and came to India's borders. And overnight, the India-Tibet border became India-China. So whatever happens inside Tibet, it concerns India's security, India's interests. Reincarnation of Dalai Lama or other Tulkus, Lamas, I say, I believe, because of my experience of 50 years of handling, of dealing, studying, knowing the Tibetan issue, I find that whatever happens inside Tibet today may be less important for the Tibetan people because they have become totally vulnerable. They have become ineffective practically. So it doesn't make any difference. As in Hindi we say Satyanas or Sama Satyanas. There is no difference. So destruction or destruction and a half. The poor people are already in a very bad shape. So addition of any new problem does not make a very big difference to the Tibetan people. But for India anything which is happening inside Tibet, it makes a big difference for the security of India, for the national, economic, and all other kind of interests of India. The issue of reincarnation is a very, very serious issue, which I wish the government of India, the policymakers of India, the opinion makers of India, they should start understanding it not as an issue of China behaving as a bully on a one monk's house or one monk's position. No, it is not. It is grabbing an institution which is going to decide the fate of Tibet forever. And once the Tibet's fate is defined forever in the Chinese way, India's case is lost forever. How? Very simple thing. The border 4,000 kilometers, India, Nepal, Bhutan, 4,000 kilometers on the other side is Tibet, occupied by China. On this side of this all 4,000 kilometers, if you see that Ladakh, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan, and Arunachal Pradesh. The border populations are predominantly Mahayana Tibetan Buddhism people. Their gurus, their root gurus of every sect or every school of Buddhism, and their root monasteries are lying in Tibet. So imagine once those root gurus are appointed by Communist Party of China, once the reincarnations have to act what the Communist Party or Chinese government says them, this will impact the morale and thinking of the population of India along our border, whom so far we have been treating as our first line of defense. So our first line of defense is going to be poisoned. It is going to be flooded. It is going to be occupied by China through, not military, through a more porous system of religious faith. India cannot therefore afford that the next Dalai Lama should be in control of China. Because once they have a Dalai Lama who is under their control, who very genuinely behaves as a good Chinese, who takes instructions from China, what will happen to Arunachal Pradesh? What will happen to Ladakh? What will happen to Uttarakhand and Himachal borders? What will happen to Sikkim? So Indian government cannot afford to be indifferent on the issue of reincarnation of Dalai Lama or other incarnate gurus. So I think it's not a charity for the Indian government to support the Dalai Lama or Tibetans on the issue. No, it is not charity, because charity is something which we can always afford not to do it. It is the issue of India's security, India's sovereignty, India's future. And I don't think any government can afford it or has a right to be lenient or indifferent to that. So my reading is that more than Tibetans, it is in the interest of India that Indian government should take a very clear stand on the issue of reincarnation of Dalai Lama. Sooner, the better. Now comes the international diplomatic coalition, which America is talking about. We discussed a few points of it already. I think Indian government has been always reluctant. I spoke of the Meera Singha Bhattacharya syndrome, which made many policy makers in our foreign policy to behave the way she wanted, as I explained, or to behave in a way that India should care for China's interests and reactions first before making any policy on China. But now that things have changed, India can afford to think a new policy, a new approach on Tibet and on China. We can afford it, we should use it. Earlier, America has been, if I'm without meaning any disrespect to America, America has been running a very on a thin line on Tibet. Sometimes when it suits their business interests, they will be on other side. They will ask the Dalai Lama to keep low and let China have or its their own corporations to have their business interests going ahead. Now America cannot afford it. Now it is on the existence, not only supremacy of America, it is on the existence of America itself as it is happening. You are seeing there are so many things happening in America which have a Chinese finger in there. Whether it is the woke movement or Gaza, Palestine movement, America has realized who are doing it, who are behind it, who are supporting it. So America is now very keen on all those issues which make China vulnerable. India has to handle China with this idea that we should have a control on every point which makes China vulnerable. Tibet is one, Xinjiang is another. South Mongolia is one more. Hong Kong is another. Manchuria is another. The democratic movement inside China is another. The Falun Gong movement is another. India should take note of all these things and make its own policy. So when America starts an international diplomatic coalition, India should take it as a gift, as a God-sent opportunity. This is in India's interest that India should promote America's international diplomatic coalition move. Another point which makes Tibet very, very, very important for India is the rivers and waters in Tibet. It's very interesting that by occupying Tibet, China has occupied all water resources of Tibet. This is another issue on which you can have another 40 minutes talk exclusively. But the gist, I will say, that China is not only exploiting Tibetan waters for its own interest. China has now started using waters of Tibet as a water bomb against India's interest. In 2005, it happened twice, and which was that year when in Parichu it happened in above Himachal, when China used accumulated water in the Tibetan river and release it on a very vulnerable time against India. And then they realized that if you just blast the river on the side of India, of Parichu, and Himachal Pradesh, right 100 kilometers inside Indian border, all villages are wiped away, all roads are gone, all bridges are gone. The Nathpa Jhakri kind of power stations become totally almost destroyed. So they use it. They used it in Arunachal Pradesh twice. And now what they are doing is they are going to use to generate electricity from Tibetan waters, rivers. Use that electricity to pump these waters a few thousand kilometers away and up above in China, which means this water will be denied to the riparian countries on the way. And there are 12 countries which are using Tibetan, which are surviving on Tibetan water. If I list those countries, why I am listing that India has a common cause with these 12 countries. Why not we join hands? Why not we create a forum, a common united front with these countries, because they have common interests, because it is Pakistan, it is Nepal, Bhutan, India itself, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. Leave aside Tibet and China. So with these 10 countries, China has a lever in hand to what you call to pull the noose on their neck. So it is in the interest of these countries, they should join hands, whether America joins or not. Because America is not going to be affected, but America is very keen in diplomatic coalition and a common front against China. So they will also join. But first, India should take the lead and make these countries, riparian countries, understand the common interest, common threat, common danger. So this is one issue on which I find that these American laws have a big significance. Now coming to the International Buddha Park. This is one of the biggest points which India has been ignoring, but has been a victim of, and one of the most potential weapon to protect is its own diplomatic, cultural, and business interests vis-a-vis China. It's very interesting to see that how China has been doing. From 2006, China started a very new kind of movement, presenting itself as the world Buddhist power of the world. The same country which is destroying every single monastery, Buddhist monastery inside Tibet, killing monks and nuns by hundreds and thousands, putting a ban on even keeping the, running a rosary, or even making tea the Tibetan style. They banned everything. They killed thousands and thousands of monks and nuns over the years, destroyed every sign of Tibetan culture, banned it. If people keep a photo of Dalai Lama is found in the pocket of any Tibetan, there is no big trial. There is fixed 7 years jail. And all rights of their family members, like ration card, like school education, like social any welfare, is withdrawn, gone. So a country and a government like that, presenting itself as the biggest champion of Buddhism and the biggest Buddhist power of the world. So they have already organized, I think, more than 5 what they called World Buddhist forums since 2006, in which they invite 2,000, 3,000 top-ranking Buddhist monks from everywhere, from Thailand, from Sri Lanka, from Cambodia, from America, from France, from Germany, all, and they treat them nicely and present their Sarkari Panchen Lama as the greatest symbol of Buddhism. They are promoting it. He is Panchen Lama, the Sarkari Panchen Lama, occupied by Chinese government in 1995, who lives under their control. Nobody knows about it. But they installed another child of their choice. So this Panchen Lama is presented as the biggest representatives of Buddhism in the world in these conferences. And Indian government, less said the better. Indian government did not realize its importance for many, many years. When they started realizing it, they came out very funny decisions. The Nalanda University was revived, and they gave the charge to all those, including our Nobel Prize winner, Amartya Sen, totally pro-China, Marxist, and anti-India on anything concerning vis-a-vis China. Who hates Buddhism, who hates Dalai Lama. They made him vice chancellor of the university, gave him funds, and he brought in all Chinese scholars and into that. Then India started its own what we call International Buddhist Conference. But instead of giving it into the hands of those who are active in this field, they made it another bureaucratic institution. That is why we don't hear anything about it. I'm no disrespect for the bureaucrats, but they are good at many good things, but they are not good at many things. They are not suitable for certain things, especially on religion, on culture. We should have had. You have Dalai Lama in your hand. China presents Panchen Lama, Sarkari Panchen Lama as the symbol of Buddhism, and you insult Dalai Lama when he gets world's biggest, richest award of the Congressional Gold Medal of American Parliament or American government, the Indian government banned in writing every Indian official and leader from attending the civic reception he was given in India Habitat Center. The only person who could dare was the mayor of Delhi, Aarti Mehra. She said, hell with you. I will go, and as the first citizen of Delhi, I'll go and honor the Dalai Lama. Otherwise, even very good politicians like Mrs. Sheila Dikshit, she was stopped from attending it as chief minister. We banned the civic reception for Dalai Lama on a very special, on his birthday or so, in Tyagaraja Stadium, or some stadium. And, he had to relocate it to Dharamshala. We didn't use Dalai Lama, who I have traveled across the many countries, and sometimes I joined Dalai Lama as his private photographer in some of his travels. He's very kind to me. So I have that privilege of, so I could see him from a distance of 5 feet, how he's received by the masses in Germany, in other countries. People go mad. A stadium of Munich, Olympic Stadium of Munich, was sold out, was filled to its capacity. Even those places where people are not allowed to sit, they were occupied, and they had to put TV screens outside for those thousands of people who were standing in queues waiting to enter. He's so popular. In Australia, I saw this happening. And we don't realize, we don't understand his, the value of his presence in India. So I think if now China is trying to grab this power which belongs to India, that India is a Buddhist power. Every place belonging to Lord Buddha and Buddhism, the highest one is in India. And China is organizing. China has practically taken over Lumbini for its own Buddhist project. And we have hardly done anything. So I think it is time for India to understand. I think we have a prime minister right now who understands the value of culture. So I think it will suit his policy that he should realize the strength of Dalai Lama's presence in India, the Tibetan refugees' presence in India, and should make best use of them to project India as the real super Buddhist power of the world. So I think, to conclude, that the American government, American Parliament's Congress decisions in recent years, they give a very good indication that the world opinion has a big scope to change itself on the issue of Tibet. And a country like Tibet, like India, which has its interests directly related to everything inside Tibet, should be the first to grab this opportunity to join hands with all those powers and use them to promote India's interests. I think this is what I wanted to say.